right? And also, our regulations, whether they are, too complicated or not, things like that. I understand that, foreign investment is a win-win, process. Foreign investors, they want to make money out of the destination, of investment, and for the countries which receive the foreign investment, of course, they would like to see more jobs being created and then revenue increased. But looking at the issue from inside India, how do you evaluate the situation?
The shared common consensus today around the world is that India is the fastest growing economy. And not just that, it's the largest market with enormous infrastructure deficit, potential for consumption, inexpensive labor, English speaking large population. That creates a very attractive business environment for foreign companies to think of investing in India and making profit. And I understand your program today is pegged on a certain number of companies exiting India. And I believe that you have seen this statistics coming from India's Minister of Commerce himself speaking in India's parliament, saying that a certain number beyond 2,000 plus companies have left India in last 7 years. But if you look at that speech carefully, in the same speech, he also says for the same period, 10,000 plus companies have also come and set up office in India in the same time, taking the total number of companies and their subsidiaries to 12,000 plus. So it's a game of give and take, where some companies are coming, other companies are leaving. But larger picture is large number of companies are coming. India's statistics of foreign direct investments are rising enormously. There is no denying that some companies, of course, will also have difficulties in dealing with the Indian situation. India is also learning step by step, evolving over a period of time. But some of the cases could also be of over ambition, of almost trying to strike gold in India, which is not possible. Let me say, India is a very price sensitive market as of now. So it will take time, like China did over several decades, to become brand conscious market over a period of time. And in that sense, there are enormous opportunities and also certain hiccups. It's a mixed game, but bigger picture, I think, is very, very impressive and attractive. And that is seeing more and more countries coming and investing. They are learning to how to work in India, just like India is learning how to deal with them and facilitate them to make profits in India and contribute to India's own Make in India ambitions.
Well, for Professor's team, I think Indians are smart enough to understand that the U.S. is trying to, let's say, have India to counter the Chinese influence, to counter China. But at the same time, I mean, India is smart enough to make good use of the geopolitical situation and for the benefits of India. But speak of that, of course, you want to provide a good, as good as possible, investment environment to attract for, investment, so to develop the economy. Do you think the Indian government is, say, simplifying the procedures or make it more attractive for investors?
I think one quick yardstick to measure whether India is trying hard enough is to look at the statistics over last 7 or 8 years of foreign direct investments. If they have been really rising up, indeed, India today is seen as the fastest growing destination for foreign investments, just like China was at some stage. And China, of course, still is a great destination for foreign investments. So that means, in the judgment of large number of investors around the world, India is doing more or less fine. I understand, as Anar Thangan said and Charles said, there are issues. And these issues normally arise because you are entering as an investor in an alien land, in a new country. Now, that new country is not going to be either United States or China. It's going to be a different country, and that's the country we are discussing, India. And therefore, they will have their own nuances, their own understanding. For example, Anar Thangan mentioned about India insisting on, lot of manpower being used locally, including senior positions. That is because India has enormous amount, in fact, excess of skilled manpower in that sense. I think estimates are that India today contributes to about 24% of global skilled workforce. And therefore, that is something which will be always, in mind when India discusses as to what will be arrangements of foreign investments. India is also.
Professor, sorry for disruptor here. Look, I mean the requirement is basically being reported here. The Indian government is asking the Chinese, for example, the phone makers like Xiaomi and Oppo or Vivo, positions in the company like a CEO, COO, or CFO, and CTO. They must come from local talent, must be held by Indians. I'm not sure, you can ask a foreign company, to provide positions to the local talent. I mean, probably the fittest will be in a position instead of who, or all the Chinese, or the Americans, or Indians should be in that position. Don't you think so?
That is exactly what I'm underlining, that each new destination will have its own set of modalities as to how investments will be accepted. And something I must underline is very often these issues are, analyzed as if China is held out as a specific case where India has different standards. India has similar standards for several other companies. I mean, other phone companies like Vodafone have had issues. You see other companies like Twitter, Apple, they're also having Indian, senior position people heading and controlling these companies. So that is something I'm trying to explain, how India, looking at its own leverages, advantages and disadvantages, tries to build its own model, which is in conjunction, is in consultation with foreign investors. I'm not saying India is beginning to dictate. Then, of course, India will not be an attractive destination for investments. So it is both sides beginning to understand each other, learn from each other, and see how India can achieve best and how other investors can also achieve best. And what I'm saying is larger number of companies are finding it fine to continue investing and working with India, working in India. And there are a very small number of companies which have had difficulties, and some of them are actually rationalizing. Many of these multinationals have, presence in multiple countries, and they always, upstick business from one and move to another. So some of these numbers are also in terms of rationalization. And others could have genuine issues, and which are again being tackled. I understand case of Xiaomi is there, and it is following the legal procedure that India has for all companies that come to India.
Let's have Charles weigh in. Speak of that. Of course, we are talking about also another sector. For example, the motor sector. BYD. They are talking about like 1 billion investment in India for a full lineup of EVs. It's a leader in this industry, and the reports say the Indian government is not keen to have this investment. Before that, of course, there's a tightening rule on FDI from China. Does that have something to do with the border issue between the two countries? Is that politics involved in the decision-making process?
I think politics is everywhere. I mean, that is how politics decides for all sectors, whether it is education, agriculture, or investments. So I would not deny that politics ultimately does influence how decisions are made. And from that perspective, also perhaps it is possible, I can't vouch for it, but it's likely that the relations between nations also determine the comfort level as to how their investments will be contracted and how they'll be actually implemented on the ground. That is a possibility, of course. But at the same time, I think it is also interesting to see that India has been constantly trying to undertake reforms. I heard both other panelists with me speaking of variations of taxation system from province to province. That may be a little dated now, because for several years now, India has set up something called Goods and Services Tax System, which is a national generic system which is applicable in all parts of the country. And in that sense, it's a process which is ongoing. In fact, even today in China, for example, you talk of consolidating and reforming much more your structures of governance and decision making. Same is true for India. But then to anticipate as to what is happening in the United States should happen exactly in an identical fashion in India, or what is happening in China, they may be a great examples of economic miracle, for example, but it's perhaps a wrong expectation to think India would replicate that model completely. And India has its own, advantages and disadvantages. India is very conscious of our, sort craftsmen, for example, the micro, medium, and small sectors. To protect those sectors is often an important agenda because Indian politicians have to go back to elections and go back to voters every 5 years. In fact, India is always on some or the other election, and therefore people on the ground matter. And all policies cannot be just driven by making profit and then taking GDP much faster ahead. It has to look at equality, equity, justice, and other issues. And they sometimes create their own sort of web of regulations, which sometimes create issues for investors. But at the same time, I keep underlining, no denying that some companies have had difficulties there, but then there are other companies who are working with India. So that is true of the situation here. Some companies are leaving, some companies are coming, but fundamentally much more companies are coming than companies that are exiting is what makes me comfortable that we are on a learning curve, and that is constantly happening. And just like I would say, Saudi Arabia has not been producing microchips, for example. So one would not expect them to be, participating in an investment where they will be giving microchips. India is producing enormous manpower, and India would like to ensure that that skilled manpower is used. In fact, ethnic
Okay.
Indians are now all over the world.
Okay, let's